Welcome back to the briefing. There's a number that defines the current state of modern warfare better than any tactical map or casualty report, and it is not a body count or a weapon system designation. It is a percentage, 90%. That is how much time the leader of a nuclear-armed nation with the world's most advanced air defense systems now spends in the air, inside an aircraft, because the ground has become a kill zone that no static defense can protect against. The leader of Israel is governing from 35,000 feet connected to his military and cabinet through highly encrypted satellite links. Because staying in one location for more than a few hours creates a targeting window that precision strike technology can exploit faster than any security protocol can prevent. Let that sink in for a moment. The most defended buildings in one of the most militarized states on Earth are now considered too vulnerable for their primary occupant to use. That is not a tactical adjustment. That is a structural admission that the assumptions about leadership security that defined the past 70 years of conflict no longer hold. And the mirror image of this reality exists on the other side. Iran's newly appointed supreme leader has a name that is a state secret, not his title, his name. The identity of the person now running Iran's government is being concealed from the public, from foreign intelligence, from everyone except the innermost circle of the IRGC command structure. Because the intelligence fusion that allowed Israel and the United States to geolocate and eliminate the previous leader is still operational and still targeting anyone who assumes visible authority. So governance in Tehran is being conducted from the shadows by a leader whose identity cannot be revealed, because revealing it creates the intelligence marker that precision strike systems require. Two governments, two nuclear threshold nations, both conducting leadership from positions of extreme operational security, because the cost of being visible, of being stationary, of occupying the buildings that governments are supposed to occupy is now higher than the cost of governing in motion or in secret. Stay with me, because what is happening in Tel Aviv explains why both leaders have adopted these extreme measures. The city is under sustained bombardment, not occasional strikes, sustained and relentless. The Iron Dome, the most tested air defense system in modern warfare, with a publicly advertised intercept rate above 90%, is failing to stop every incoming threat. Not because the technology is inferior, but because Iran's military doctrine has evolved to exploit the one vulnerability that no air defense system can overcome: volume. The strategy is called saturation. Fire more projectiles than the defender has interceptors. Force the system to engage cheaper threats with expensive missiles until the defender's magazine is depleted and the high-value targets get through. A drone that costs $5,000 to manufacture forces Israel to fire an interceptor that costs $50,000. A basic rocket forces a response that costs 10 times more. And when you scale that across hundreds of launches per day, the financial and logistical mathematics become unsustainable for the defender. Israel is spending its way into a stockpile crisis, while Iran is mass-producing the threats that create it. Now here is where the cost asymmetry becomes catastrophic. The United States, Israel's primary military backer and the source of its most advanced defensive systems, just lost one of its most valuable strategic assets in the region. The ANTPY-2 radar, the primary sensor for the THAAD missile defense system stationed at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, was struck and destroyed in a precision attack. This is not a truck-mounted launcher or a field battery. This is a $500 million radar array the size of a football field, designed to detect ballistic missiles hundreds of miles away and provide the tracking data that allows interceptors to engage them. It was the eye of the entire air defense architecture in the Eastern Theater, and it is now blind. The strike that destroyed it required intelligence on the exact location of a system that is mobile, heavily defended, and operated under strict emissions control to avoid giving away its position. Someone knew where it was, when it would be vulnerable, and how to get ammunition through the defenses surrounding it. That is not battlefield opportunism. That is intelligence-driven targeting at a level that suggests either catastrophic operational security failures or penetration of the networks that control U.S. military positioning in the region. But the damage is not limited to hardware. The first 100 hours of this conflict have cost the United States approximately $37 billion, not direct military expenditure, and economic impact. Gas prices in the United States have spiked to their highest levels in 18 months. The Dubai stock market, a critical financial hub for Middle Eastern capital flows, has lost value as attacks on American assets create uncertainty about regional stability. And the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point through which 1/5 of the world's oil transits, is under a closure threat that has sent insurance premiums for tanker traffic to levels that make commercial shipping economically unviable. Iran has publicly stated it will only target Israeli and American vessels, but the insurance underwriters who price risk for every tanker moving through that strait do not operate on public statements. They operate on actuarial models, and those models now show that the probability of loss in Hormuz has increased to the point where coverage costs more than the cargo is worth. Shipping companies are refusing to transit. Energy that needs to move from the Gulf to Europe and Asia is not moving. And the ripple effects are appearing in heating bills in Canada, transportation costs in Europe, and manufacturing inputs across every supply chain that depends on Gulf oil or liquefied natural gas. Now consider what is happening on the northern front while all of this unfolds. Hezbollah launched rocket attacks into northern Israel that wounded 8 soldiers, including the son of a senior government minister. That detail matters. This is not random collateral damage. This is a conflict that has now reached directly into the families of the decision makers who authorized the strikes that started it. When the children of cabinet officials are being wounded in retaliatory strikes, the political pressure to escalate, to demonstrate strength, to retaliate harder, becomes a domestic imperative that overrides strategic calculation. And that pressure is compounding at the exact moment when the conflict is expanding beyond a regional war into something that involves nuclear-armed global powers. Russia has entered the equation, not with troops or direct military intervention, but with something more valuable and more dangerous: intelligence. Multiple credible reports indicate that Russia is providing Iran with targeting data, satellite imagery, and strategic guidance on how to strike American positions in the region. The phone call between the Russian and Iranian heads of state, confirmed by both governments, is being interpreted in Western capitals as the formalization of a military partnership that has been developing in the shadows for months. Russia has spent 2 years watching its own communications, and military planning appear in Western press reports with suspicious regularity. It has purged officers, restricted access, and tightened operational security in ways that suggest deep institutional paranoia about penetration. And now it is sharing sensitive intelligence with Iran, a country that just lost its supreme leader in a strike that succeeded, despite having Chinese radar systems. Russian missile technology and 2.5 hours of advance warning from Beijing about incoming Israeli F-35s. If Russia is willing to provide targeting data to a partner whose security apparatus was just catastrophically compromised, that suggests either desperation to create problems for the United States in multiple theaters simultaneously, or confidence that the intelligence sharing will not be traced back in ways that create direct consequences for Moscow. Here is what all of this looks like from the perspective of an American voter who is not tracking THAAD systems or insurance premiums. Gas prices are up. That is the only metric that matters domestically. Polling shows a majority of Americans do not view this as their war and do not want to bear the costs. Political figures who campaigned on ending wars now face a credibility test as the administration prosecutes the largest air campaign in the region since 2003 without a clear endpoint, without defined objectives, and without congressional authorization. The domestic political cost is compounding daily as energy prices rise, economic impact spreads, and casualties mount without a narrative explaining why American interests require continued involvement in a war that started with a decapitation strike and has expanded to involve Russian intelligence sharing Chinese radar systems and retaliatory attacks on American bases across 12 countries. And the operational reality is getting worse, not better. Israel's military is conducting air operations at a tempo that requires real-time intelligence fusion, logistical support, and diplomatic cover that only the United States can provide. Ground forces are advancing into southern Lebanon, while evacuation orders are being issued for neighborhoods in Beirut, and sustained bombardment is reshaping the political geography of the region before any ceasefire can freeze positions. This is not a counterterrorism operation with limited objectives. This is territorial restructuring under the cover of a regional war. And the strategic question that no one in Washington or Tel Aviv wants to answer publicly is what happens when the objectives of that restructuring conflict with the interests of other regional powers who have their own stakes in Lebanon's political future. Turkey is watching. The Gulf states are watching. Egypt is watching. Every government in the region is recalculating what alignment with the United States means when that alignment produces economic costs, security vulnerabilities, and political pressure without corresponding benefits in the form of stability or protection. The THAAD radar that just got destroyed in Jordan was supposed to be the guarantee that American defensive systems could protect allied nations from ballistic missile threats. Its destruction demonstrates that even the most advanced systems can be defeated by adversaries with sufficient intelligence, precision, and willingness to strike high-value targets. And if a $500 million radar array can be taken offline, then what protection do the Patriot batteries and THAAD systems stationed in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar actually provide? The answer is less than their governments paid for. And that realization is driving a reassessment of security relationships that have defined the region for decades. Now here's the part that should terrify anyone paying attention to the trajectory of this conflict. The cost to attack is always lower than the cost to defend when the attacker can mass-produce threats faster than the defender can replace interceptors. Iran's drone and missile production capacity, even after losing 60 to 80% of its launch facilities in the initial strikes, is still sufficient to sustain operations at a level that forces Israel and the United States to expend interceptors faster than they can be resupplied. The Shahed drones that are overwhelming air defenses cost less than $20,000 to manufacture. The interceptors being used to shoot them down cost between $50,000 and $1 million depending on the system. That 10-to-1 cost disparity means that every engagement favors the attacker economically. And when you multiply that across sustained conflict, the defender reaches a point where continuing to engage every threat depletes stockpiles to levels that create vulnerabilities for higher priority targets. Which brings us to the Ukrainian solution that desperation is now importing into the Gulf. Britain is coordinating the transfer of Ukrainian military engineers to the United Arab Emirates to test low-cost anti-drone systems developed during 4 years of defending against the exact saturation attacks that are now overwhelming Gulf air defenses. The systems cost $2,000 to $3,000. Acoustic sensors, rapid-fire targeting, low-tech counters to high-volume threats. They work on land in Eastern Europe. Whether they work over water in the Persian Gulf, whether they can be integrated with existing air defense networks, whether they can be scaled to protect critical infrastructure across multiple countries simultaneously, all of that is unknown. It is an experiment being conducted in real time with the economic and military infrastructure of the Gulf states as the test environment. If it works, it represents the first viable solution to the cost asymmetry problem. If it does not, then the current trajectory continues until one side's capacity to sustain operations collapses. So here is the question no one wants to answer. What happens when the leader of a nuclear-armed state is governing from an aircraft because the ground is too dangerous? What happens when the identity of another nuclear threshold nation's leader is a state secret because visibility creates a kill zone? What happens when a $500 million radar gets destroyed, $37 billion in economic damage accumulates in 100 hours, and gas prices spike to 18-month highs while polling shows the public does not support the war? What happens when Russia starts providing targeting data to Iran, when Hezbollah strikes wound the children of cabinet ministers, when insurance premiums make commercial shipping unviable, and when the defender is spending itself into stockpile exhaustion while the attacker mass produces threats at 1/10 the cost? The answer is not in any tactical assessment or weapon system analysis. The answer is in the mathematics of asymmetric warfare and the political sustainability of conflicts that impose costs without delivering victories. Share this now, because the gap between what officials are saying about defensive capabilities and what the destruction of a $500 million radar reveals about actual vulnerabilities is not a minor discrepancy. It is the gap between the security architecture that was promised and the kill zones that leaders are now hiding from at 35,000 feet.